Kevin, great to be back with you, and great to be back in Qatar. So look, this panel is all about building brands through communities. That can be a bit vague for people, so let's try to give specific examples of what we're talking about.
Okay.
Hello Sunshine is a media company founded by Reese Witherspoon, one of Candle Media's largest acquisitions. Now, it's produced massive TV hits like The Morning Show, Big Little Lies. Tell us how she built a community to help her achieve success and give herself the best chance.
Yeah, sure. You know, Reese Witherspoon is a very unique talent. She is, for women in her age group, she's the voice of her generation, actually, much like Oprah Winfrey has been for a slightly older demographic. So she founded something called Reese's Book Club, and it has about 5 million members. And she uses this book club to find intellectual property on which to base movies and television shows. So she has a very privileged access to great IP. She knows what works in her community. And by the way, community requires a two-way interaction. That's why communities are best built on social media versus a broadcast media where you might just be transmitting. You have to transmit and you have to receive feedback from your audience. So she was very focused on that. She broke really new ground on this with this book club. And the shows that you mentioned have come from that book club environment that she created. So if you talk to Reese and you talk to now Candle Media, the parent company, we're all about content. So traditional media storytelling, TV length and film length stories. We're about social media storytelling, extending those brands and those storytelling techniques onto social media to get that two-way interaction and to extend the life of franchises in a very powerful way. And then to complete this flywheel is using that social media storytelling and that connection with audiences to conclude e-commerce transactions and licensing and merchandising around the stories. So it's a very complete 360 kind of flywheel that has the consumer at the center and all sorts of different storytelling techniques around it. And it's been very powerful.
Absolutely, and that's very compelling for studios, right? Because that's one of their biggest worries, commissioning something that doesn't have the audience that they thought it would. And Reese can put that in front of them and give them this data that makes their decision and people like yourself who were greenlighting these kind of things a lot easier.
It really does, because if you know the audience loves a story, that it resonates with their audience, and by the way, Reese tells stories for women and by women. I mean, she's very focused, you know, men watch these shows too, obviously, but they're really built around women in front of the camera, behind the camera, in key roles in the storytelling. And she knows what's going to work because of this book club connection and that community that she has. So it really does reduce the risk of a story just not landing with an audience. And it's been proven to be, again, super effective, and the product speaks for itself. She's had some of the best shows on television, I think.
Big Little Lies, one of my favorite series of the last 10 years. Let's talk about TikTok briefly. How important is TikTok for Candle Media, and how do your brands leverage TikTok as a platform?
Well, I mean, TikTok is one of several social media storytelling platforms, obviously. Now, it just so happens that I was at TikTok briefly, as was mentioned. I love TikTok as a platform, as a user, as the first instance of really using a mass deployment of artificial intelligence and machine learning to curate a stream of videos. You know, the For You feed, I'm sure everyone in the audience uses TikTok. That For You feed is AI driven. And it's not generative AI, but it's curation AI, which is another really important part of the AI ecosystem. But you know, TikTok is for creators, it's for marketers to use influencers to market their products, it's for direct sales of people that are doing, live streams and selling their own products or third-party products. But it's not a great platform for professionally produced content because they don't share revenue the way YouTube does. So, love TikTok, it's probably the most important platform in the world at this point. YouTube is every bit as big, has every bit as much reach, and they do share revenues on an advertising basis with the producers of content. So you find more professionally produced content on YouTube than on TikTok. So I'd say YouTube's our main partner for that.
The reason why I mentioned TikTok is, as I'm sure many people in the audience are aware, they're facing a ban in the US, and I couldn't have the CEO or the former CEO of TikTok up here without asking about that. You've done this dance before. You were in charge when President Trump version 1 was trying to ban it himself. And now he's seemingly on the friendlier side of negotiating that ban or the potential of that ban. How wild is it for you to seeing this playing out today as the same as it was in 2020?
Well, when I was there in 2020, you're right. President Trump was issuing executive orders to try to ban TikTok, and he was unsuccessful because he overstepped his authority as president, and there's checks and balances in the way the US government runs. Now, it's a little more difficult because in the US, both houses of Congress have passed the law, President Biden signed the law, and just recently the Supreme Court of the United States ratified the law on a unanimous basis. So that law is in place, and it does require President Trump to find a buyer and for China to agree to sell. So, I'm not in the middle of this anymore. It's a complicated situation. I do think that Trump has, the ability and the capability to make this transaction happen, but something does have to happen. It can't just be status quo, I don't think.
Right. He's floated this idea of a joint venture. Does that work?
I'm not sure who the joint venture would be with. He's floated things like the US government would be the joint venture partner. I think it's more likely that a Musk, a Larry Ellison, who's very close to the president, and Oracle, Larry Ellison is the CEO of Oracle. Oracle does host TikTok in the cloud, and they do a great job of it. Something along those lines. There's no shortage of people that would like to own and buy TikTok in the United States. It's hard to contemplate a social media platform like TikTok just existing in one country and not globally, so that's a bit of a nit.
Yeah.
The algorithm can't be exported out of China because of export laws that the Chinese government put in place in 2020.
Yeah.
It's complicated, and I'm not sure how it's going to turn out. I hope it survives, I really do. It's a great platform.
Yeah, it sounds very complicated, and this prospect of a joint deal, no one really quite knows how it's going to shake out, but...
We'll know by the next 45 or 50 days, I suppose.
Let's stay tuned. Look, let's touch on some huge news in the entertainment industry from last week. Amazon took creative control of the James Bond franchise. Now, you've led similar acquisitions of hot intellectual property when you were at Disney. You helped lead the acquisition of Marvel, of Lucasfilm. What are the challenges facing Amazon to maintain the integrity of a brand as important to a community as James Bond versus their need to distribute it widely on their platforms and expand the franchise?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. Franchises and the brands associated with franchises are very fragile. Now, James Bond has been one of the longest running franchises I think might be the longest running franchise in movie history. So there's a large canon behind this. And I think it's important that in managing a franchise of that longevity and that's that beloved and is that well defined. James Bond's a pretty well defined character and a set of stories are pretty well known. So I think, and the team at Amazon is very, very capable. Mike Hopkins is a close friend of mine. He runs the Prime Video there, and his team beneath him is Jen Salke and the others are very, very capable. But I would say having done this at Disney over Marvel and Star Wars and Pixar and now and then 21st Century Fox, you have to take great care. You have to make what I would call brand deposits all the time, doing positive things that reinforce the elements of what a brand really means to the consumers of that brand, and be very careful to limit the withdrawals that you make. And again, very fragile. The story elements have to coincide with what people expect of James Bond. Not that complicated, but you can easily mess it up too.
Absolutely.
And I do have a lot of faith in that Amazon team. I think they'll do a great job with it, but it was big news. I mean, the Broccoli's have controlled that forever, and it's going to be interesting to see how Amazon treats it. Certainly the distribution will be good.
Absolutely. I was going to say, distribution is probably one of the main things that there may have been a disagreement about between the Broccoli family and Amazon, whether to distribute on streaming platforms, whether to go to theater. There's been a lot of toing and froing between major studios about that strategy.
Yeah.
Do you think it's inevitable that we will get a James Bond straight to streaming one day?
The bar has been raised for movies that people want to go see in a theater. Small dramas and things of that nature, rom-coms. That's hard to imagine that people need to go to theaters nowadays with streaming and home home theaters being at the level of quality that they are. But a James Bond movie is all about action. It's about visual effects. It's about the sound. It's about the sharing that experience with the audience. So I think the audiences ultimately decide, should I see it in the theater? Should I wait to see it in streaming? I don't think in the near term you'll see James Bond releases not having a theatrical period where they're exclusively in theaters. I think that will continue to happen, and I think Amazon's happy to do that. Those releases actually build brands, it builds awareness, and the marketing behind the release actually continues to perpetuate the quality and the awareness of that entire franchise. So there's a lot to be said about going to theaters first. I think Amazon will do that. That window might be a little less than it has been in the past. And of course, on streaming, it's going to be a huge boon to Amazon Prime.
How about an American Bond? Do you think that's in the cards?
I hope not.
I hope not too.
Bond is British, period.
Exactly. Glad you said that. Let's talk a bit about the box office as well. The top 3 films of 2024 were all Disney and all sequels. Inside Out 2, Deadpool Wolverine, and Moana 2. What does that tell us about the ability to build brands through community?
It tells you a lot. I mean, if you think about each of those storylines have come from studios that have been around a long time, all owned by Disney, obviously. The power of brands, the power of known intellectual property that resonates with people, it's hard to overstate the importance of that. And so you see these, and Bond is even a better example of that. Over 40 films, I think, in the Bond canon. So it's just another example of brands mattering to people, brands cutting through the clutter, knowing what you get. If you see a Pixar movie, you know it's going to be heartwarming, it's going to have some social message that's important for kids, but it's going to be entertaining for adults. If you look at Marvel characters are always flawed. It's always a lot of humor along with the action. Deadpool takes that to another level, obviously. And you know, those films are loved, and it's a franchise that, again, you can spoil it if you don't take care, and a lot of sequels are bad. Disney's really good at making great sequels and really good at extending the power and the appeal of a franchise. So not surprised at all that Disney had the 3 biggest box office wins last year.
And Deadpool Wolverine in particular, Ryan Reynolds, I think, does a great job at building that community organically. And he did that with the first Deadpool, and he clearly did it with Deadpool Wolverine. You know, what can we learn from him, and what can other brands and other actors take from what he's done and apply it to their own films?
Well, Ryan Reynolds is one of the hardest working people, forget just actors, one of the hardest working people I've ever met in my life. He knows how to market, he knows how to use social media, he knows how to use humor to appeal to his audiences. I mean, he did that with Mint Mobile. There's a mobile carrier in the US that's very successful. He was the voice of that. He grinds it out. He works really hard, and he knows what he means to consumers. He knows what his voice is, and I think that's really important. And his use of social media is impeccable. He's excellent. He's one of the best.
Absolutely, and it shows. Moana 2 as well, that was an interesting case because that pivoted from what was initially going to be a streaming series to a theatrical release. I think Bob Iger, your old friend of Disney, said, we were impressed with what we saw and we knew it deserved a theatrical release. What does that tell us about the evolving strategy for major studios in the streaming era? Because as I said before, there was a time where the theory was release on streaming, bring in the audience for the streamers and increase subscriptions that way.
Yes, I mean, it's a fine balance. Clearly, the more a show is only available on streaming or an experience is only available on streaming, that helps to acquire customers, it helps to retain customers. And that, you know, if you look at the streaming economics, it's all about customer acquisition, the amount of revenue, the ARPU you can get, the average revenue per user you can get on a monthly basis, and the churn, reducing people disconnecting from your service. So it's important to have exclusive content on streaming. The Disney franchises are so powerful and they're so long lasting, and kids like to watch them over and over and over. So Disney can afford to put, and should, put these films first in theaters and then on streaming, because kids will watch them over and over and over. So you don't lose much by putting it on in the theater first, and you gain a lot of marketing, and you gain a lot of awareness. There's nothing that can replace a theatrical release for creating brand awareness, because of the amount of marketing that goes behind it. And everyone knows these days that a film that's made by Disney, that's in the theater, ultimately goes on to Disney Plus in a few months and is there forever. So that also helps Disney Plus. I can't say the same for all studios, but for Disney, that strategy works really, really well.
Do you think that example is going to give studios a headache now, where artists are going to be saying to them, look at Moana, you wanted to send that straight to streaming, and it's now the biggest box office film of 2024. What about my film?
Yep. It's going to cause some problems and some headaches and some arm wrestling with talent. But again, I think we have to be honest with ourselves in the Hollywood community too. The bar for what should be in a theater has been raised quite substantially. And post-COVID, the box office hasn't fully come back to where it was pre-COVID, nor will it ever, I don't think. And I just think that it takes a certain type of movie with spectacular visuals to really deserve to be in a theater, that must be in a theater. And so I think that that arm wrestling will continue, but I still think you'll see movies that would have otherwise been in a theater 5 or 10 years ago that will now not be in theaters.
And what would you say the biggest challenges are in building a loyal community in the age of streaming when audiences have so many options?
It's always been about quality first. Brands are only as good and as relevant and as vibrant as the product that they represent. So the one thing that Disney did right, I think very, very right, is they took their movie slate and their television slate and they collapsed it down to do fewer, bigger things. For a while there, when Bob Iger was gone, it expanded too much and it diffused their efforts over too many projects. Bob Iger came back and did this and refocused on the strategy. Fewer, bigger things. You had to break through the clutter. You have to create product that supports the brands that ride above the product. And if you can get those brands to mean something to consumers in a consistent way that you keep reinforcing through great product releases, those brands become meaningful, break through the clutter, and you can have a very successful streaming service or social media presence or whatever it might be. Quality, quality, quality. But the moment you break that, the moment you do something different that's unexpected, that's not as good, those brands can collapse pretty quickly. And you saw that at Disney a few years ago when it was struggling, and now Bob's back and is doing better. So make things that are great, make sure that people know the brand with which they're associated. Make sure Moana, everyone knows that's a Disney and Pixar movie. Make sure that Wolverine, that's Marvel. Make that brand connection. And if you have quality and a brand attribution that's really well known and well established, that brand can then carry you forward throughout all the noise and clutter that's in the marketplace. And that's crucial.
That is, Kevin, that's a great place to leave it. I think we'll leave it there. Ladies and gentlemen, Kevin Mayer.
Thank you.